Welcome back. It is that time again. It is the monthly reading wrap up. So happy May, and let's look back to April and what we read in April. If you have not watched any of my reading wrap ups before, I'll give you a quick disclaimer. I like to do these all in one take, which means I don't speak eloquently the entire time. I pause and I say, So if that's going to annoy you, I'm just giving you that disclaimer here at the beginning. I did read 4 fiction books this month, and then I DNF'd one poetry book as well. So that's what I'll be talking about today. The first book that I finished in April is called Hard by a Great Forest, and it's by Leo Vardiashvili. And the genre is fiction, but also sort of mystery, which is a little outside of my comfort zone. I don't know that I've ever read a mystery before in my adult life. I'm sure I did as a child, like Nancy Drew or something, but as an adult, I have not read any mystery, so this was a little out of my comfort zone. But the synopsis of this story, our main character Saba, he and his brother and their father are from Georgia, like the country Georgia, not the US state Georgia. And they immigrate to London, to the UK, and then they, grow up there. And as adults, their father decides to go back to Georgia, and then the two sons sort of lose contact with him. And so Saba's brother, the main character's brother, goes back to Georgia too to look for the father. And then eventually Saba loses contact with him too. So then our main character, Saba, of course, goes to Georgia. And the mystery part is sort of Saba trying to find his brother and trying to find their father. The reason I picked up this book in the first place is because it's set in Georgia, and I didn't know anything about Georgia at all. So I thought, what better way for me to learn a little bit about a place I've never heard of, or not never heard of, but about a place that I don't know anything about, than to read a book set in that place. So that was the pull for me to read this book, and now I'll tell you what I thought about it. The way that Georgia was depicted in this story was very otherworldly to me. And part of that is probably just because I'm from the United States, like I've lived here my entire life, and I grew up in a, a middle class family, I would say. So a lot of these things are sort of difficult for me to imagine, but that's basically the whole reason we read fiction in the first place, because we can't imagine these places unless someone who has lived it is telling us about it. But anyway, it did seem otherworldly to me. There was sort of poor infrastructure and road systems and deeply corrupt police. There were also escaped zoo animals. And I looked this up after I finished the book. The part about the escaped zoo animals is true. This happened in maybe, I want to say 2015 or 2016, but in the capital of Georgia, there was a huge flood and it went through a zoo. And so a lot of the animals were killed in the flood, but the ones that were not killed were sort of just like let loose accidentally because of the flood. And so there were literal tigers and a hippopotamus just like roaming the city, which is deeply scary to think about because in real life and in the story, people had run ins with these escaped zoo animals. So I can only imagine. Yeah, that is wild. And there are also wide expanses of untouched wilderness that they traverse through, and some really small villages along a river that they end up traversing. And so it felt very otherworldly to me, the way that they were writing and describing Georgia. But I did find it extremely fascinating. And okay, so we've talked mostly about the setting, but let me talk about the story itself and the plot. I felt like this is what I wrote in my review. I felt like we didn't get to feel the weight of some very heavy moments. There were lots of heavy moments in this story. And I listed some of them, but I won't say those just because of spoilers. I think there was so much going on, and for pacing's sake, we did not get to delve super deeply into some of the crazy, outlandish, and remarkable things that were happening to the main character. And I guess I wanted more from those scenes, but I understand why we couldn't get that because number one, the author was on a journey and he couldn't sit and ponder and reflect on the things that were happening to him because he had to keep going on his journey. So I understand that. And then the second thing is also just if we did stop and reflect on everything, the book would have been like 3 times as long as it was. So I understand why we couldn't do that, but I sort of wanted that a little bit as I was reading. I also found the journey of reading this book to be very wayward and gnarled, which is a lot like the main character's journey. So I felt like the reader's journey and the main character's journey are sort of parallel in that way, where not everything is making sense and some things are too fast, some things are too slow. I don't know if that was an intentional choice from the author, but that's how I felt reading it. And last thing I said is I wanted a little bit more from the ending, but I feel that way about a lot of books, so that's neither here nor there. This one I found really hard to rate, like out of 5 stars. I'm giving it a tentative 4, and I think it's very worth reading to anyone in general, but I also think it's very worth reading if you don't know anything about Georgia, the country. I do think it was a very good book. Moving on. Next book that I finished in April is also one that I felt like was really hard for me to rate, and it's called Strange Weather in Tokyo by Hiromi Kawakami. And this is Japanese literature. The genre is, I think, just fiction, plain fiction. The synopsis is that we have a woman in her 30s who crosses paths again with a teacher from her high school, and they form a romantic attachment. That's not a spoiler, that's like the whole premise of the book. And hearing that synopsis, you might think, oh, this is going to be like a will they, won't they, forbidden love, teacher student trope. It's none of that. The author does not lean into that forbidden love angle that you would expect from a story set up like this. It's just, I don't know. I guess I would expect that to be there, but it was not there. So if you're reading it because you like tension like that, this is probably not the book for you because none of the tension is there in that way. Also, the book is heavily centered around these two characters forming a romantic attachment, and so you might assume that this book is a romance. And I think you would be wrong in that assumption, especially if you're very used to reading like American modern romances. If you're used to that sort of romance, this is not the book for you at all. It's completely different than what you would be used to if those are the books you typically read. And those are the books, romance books, that I would typically read too, but this is just very not that. And here's my review about the book. Okay, I haven't read much Japanese literature, but the handful of Japanese books that I have read, including this one, seem much more in tune with the mundane of the world, and it seems more focused on the quiet moments in life and very regular characters. I feel like in American literature and even Western literature as a whole, everything's very sensationalized, dramatic, passionate. That is not what this book is. And I can't speak for the entirety of Japanese literature because I have not read enough Japanese literature to say something like that. But I do think I've read maybe 3 books from Japan, and all 3 of them have done this, where they're just so focused on the mundane and very regular characters. And I really, really like that about what Japanese literature I have read so far. And so for that reason, I did like this book. But as for the romance in this book, it was not for me. Like, if I were reading this book because I wanted to read a romance, this would have been maybe like a 1 star for me. But because I really was drawn to that almost romanticization, you know what I mean, of the mundane, like that is what drew me in. And I don't really think that was the point of the book, but I really latched onto that and really loved that. Like I said, this one also felt hard to rate. I would give it maybe like a 3.75. 3.75, we'll say. Next book is the poetry book that I DNF'd. It is Selected Poems by Rita Dove, and the genre is obviously poetry. Here's the thing with me and poetry. I just started reading poetry at the beginning of March, so I have not been reading it long. And the first poetry, actually, I do have this book. The first poetry book that I read when I started reading poetry again is New and Selected Poems, Volume 1 by Mary Oliver. And when I tell you that let me just say, this was a 6-star read for me out of 5 stars. Like this, it felt like it couldn't be better. Like the way that Mary Oliver writes poetry is the exact way that speaks to my soul. But I don't want to get so, what's the word? I keep thinking blindsided, but that's not the word. I don't want to be so attached to Mary Oliver's poetry that I can't enjoy the poetry of other poets. And so I've been pushing myself to try to read poetry from other poets. And every time I try, it misses the mark because what I want it to be is Mary Oliver's poetry. And nobody does it like her. And that's not a bad thing. Like every poet should have their own voice. It's just that I found the voice that I loved the most. And so everything else just sort of like, it feels like it's paling in comparison to her. And that's sort of how I felt with this book, Selected Poems by Rita Dove. It is split into 3 parts, 3 books, and I read the first book of the 3, and I DNF'd it after that point. Some of the poems I felt like you have to read between the lines to fully understand what the poet is writing about, and I prefer poetry that's really accessible and that you don't have to read between the lines. Some of the poems felt really long to me, and I don't know. I really want to like other poets besides just Mary Oliver, but I'm just having a hard time doing that right now. And I will say there were lots of good moments in this book. Just as a whole, I just didn't want to keep reading. One line that I wrote down that I thought was really nice, she wrote, "In a far, far land where men are men and women are sun and sky." I thought that was pretty. I liked the poem Kentucky 1833, but that was actually more like prose and not really even poetry. And then I also wrote that I liked the poem Nexus, but that poem was about nature, and that's very reminiscent of Mary Oliver. Like Mary Oliver, I won't say she could have written that poem, but I will say that those were like comparable poems to me. And so I think that's maybe why I liked that poem in particular. But yeah, I DNF'd that one, unfortunately. Okay. 2 more books to go. One of them, the next one is called Commuters by Emily Gray Tedrow. and the genre is fiction. The synopsis is that there are two elderly people that are getting married. I think they're in their 70s, could be 80s, but I think 70s. And it sort of just shows us how their adult children react to them getting married, and then sort of like the family dynamics, family drama that happens after they decide to get married. And then with that too comes like rewriting the will or, things like that. So I think I had higher expectations for this book, and so it sort of fell flat for me. It was very okay. I I read this after the Japanese book that I felt really wrote mundane moments very well and very beautifully, and I think I wanted that in this book, and it just wasn't there. But I am fascinated in finding books about family dynamics, mundane moments, and very regular characters. Like, I don't want to read, like, think about the books that maybe you read growing up, like Harry Potter, Hunger Games, Divergent, things like that. It's like it's centered around an exceptional character. And at this moment in my life, I want to read about unexceptional characters. And that's sort of what I thought I was going to be getting into. Like, I thought it was just going to be regular people, ordinary lives, mundane moments, and then a little sprinkle of family dynamics, which I thought would be really fascinating. But I don't know, it just missed the mark for me somehow. One thing I will say that I liked about this book, though, is there is a very prevalent theme throughout this book that one of the main characters, this is told in 4 perspectives, by the way. One of the perspectives is the elderly woman who's getting married, the grandmother, and her name's Winnie. And Winnie has this huge, beautiful historic home, and there is a massive, like, century-old sycamore tree in the front yard, and she wants to put a swimming pool in the front yard, but they would have to cut down the historic sycamore tree to put the pool in. And the reason she wants to put the pool in is because her new husband, he has like back pain or like arthritis or something, and being in a pool is the only thing that relieves him of that pain. So she really wants to get this pool because she loves him. She wants to relieve his pain. And I feel like it's safe to say that the average person would be like, we can't cut this tree down. It's 100 years old. It's important. It's historic. It's a living, breathing thing, a part of nature. I feel like a lot of people would think that, and I think even Winnie herself would think that on principle. But because the comfort and the pain relief of someone she loves is at stake, she really wants to cut this tree down. And I feel like that's so fascinating that when you really love someone and when you really care about someone, not even like romantic love, but let's just say a parent, a sibling, a family member, a friend, it can be a partner, but I find it so fascinating and so human when somebody will go against their own principles for the comfort of someone they love. I think that's one of the most human things that we do, and I found it very fascinating. So that's one thing I did like about the book, but overall, I would probably just give this like a 2.5 or 3 out of 5. It was just very average. And the last book that I'll talk about is the one that I finished most recently. It's called The Stationery Shop by Marjan Kamali. The genre is historical fiction, and it is set in Iran. I want to say like 1950s Iran. I could totally be wrong, but the whole premise is that these 2 teenagers, okay, it's told in past and present. In the present, they are elderly people. In the past, they are teenagers, and it's a girl and a boy who grow up in Iran, and they sort of fall in love in a stationery shop. Every book lover's dream. And this is not a spoiler, it's in the synopsis, but they, for some reason, are separated, can't be together, and then we catch back up with them in the present when they are elderly people and they haven't seen each other or talked to each other in several decades. And it just gives us sort of their love story and then what happens after that, and then the present moment. And here's my review about it. I felt a bit of a slump somewhere in the middle of this book, but the ending really lifted this book up drastically for me. The story was beautiful. Roya and Baman's story, that was the beautiful part. But it's heartbreaking. Well, I don't want to give a spoiler. It's beautiful and it's heartbreaking. Okay, I realize I can't really say anything about the story without it being a spoiler, so I'm just going to go ahead and say I really liked this story and I would recommend this story. And then I'll read the last part of my review. Although this was not the point of the book, I was very marveled at the author's use of run-on sentences in the epilogue to show something in particular that I won't say because I don't want it to be a spoiler, but I feel like the author wrote the epilogue so well and so beautifully, and she used the run-on sentences in the perfect way, in the perfect format that really, to me, got across the feeling that I assume the author was trying to give, was trying to portray. I think it was so beautiful. I actually made a copy of the last 2 pages of this book, and I have it like hung up over above my desk because I just thought it was so beautiful. And how often is it the epilogue of a book that we think, wow, that is beautiful, gorgeous writing. The author did so well. For me, I feel like I never think that about the epilogue. Not that the epilogues are bad, it's just not the memorable part of a book for me personally. But in this one, I thought it was beautifully and tastefully done and so impactful. Oh, and here's what I wrote. I think the last 2 pages are very authentic and true to the beautiful and the optimistic human spirit. So, those are all the books that I read in April. I am currently reading Then the Fish Swallowed Him by Amir Ahmadi Aryan. This book is also set in Iran, but the reason I feel like I wanted to read it after reading another book set in Iran is because the first one it's very like centered in romance and it's very beautiful. This book is not that at all. This book is... So the synopsis is basically this middle-aged man is a bus driver in the capital of Iran, and they are... what is it called? Oh, unionizing. They're in a union to, get better rights for the people who do their job. And he ends up getting arrested. And to me, this is reading like a psychological thriller, which I never, ever read. Ever. I'm very much a general fiction girly, and this is not what I typically read. I think the whole book, I'm not finished with it, but I'm probably 2/3 of the way through the book, and it's basically just him. It's a mental game. Like, it's him and his interrogator and the interrogation, and it's brutal physically and mentally. And, he's in prison, and there's just a lot going on. So I say that to say that I just finished reading a book set in Iran, and then I'm reading a second book set in Iran, and they are extremely different from each other. That one was more like lovey-dovey sweet, and this one is like, I don't even know if I want to finish it because I'm scared. That's what this book is. So, but I am pretty far through it now, so I will definitely finish it. And I do think it's fascinating, and I'm glad that I gave this book a chance, because typically, like I said, I wouldn't read a book in this sort of like psychological thriller space. But yeah, and I also really like the cover of the book. Hopefully you can see that. I don't know if there's a glare. There's a library book. It's a library book, so it's got the plastic on it. So hopefully you can see. But those are all the books that I read in April, and the book that I'm about to finish now that we're here in May. Let's see, what else am I reading? Ooh, actually, I'll just tell you about one more book before I go. This book is called Unsent Love Letters. It's an anthology of words left unspoken, and it's curated and edited by R. Clift. R. Clift is a poet that I have met, and she signed this book for me too. See, she signed it. But it's basically exactly what the title sounds like. It's people sent in to R. Clift. They sent her their unsent love letters that they wrote but never sent to the person they were intended to. And it's not just romantic love. It's like parents to children, children to parents. It's all kinds of love. And I have not read all of it yet. I'm very much, I don't even know if you can see my bookmark, but I'm very much still at the beginning. I'm on page 12, so I can't really say anything about this, but I love the idea of this book, and the letters that I've read in the book so far are beautiful. And I think it's just fascinating to read a book like this because it's not written by an author. It's not written by a poet. It's written by regular people who exist in real life, who wrote letters to other people who exist in real life and then sent them in to be in this book. So what a fascinating idea. I wish I could read more books by people who feel like they're not writers, even though, you know, if you're writing, you're a writer, in my opinion, but just regular people who wouldn't identify with the term writer. I would love to read more books by them, but I feel like that would be a really hard task. But yeah, that's all I have for you today. I would love to know what you're reading in April and in May, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.